So the presentation is called People-Friendly Cities, the Interconnections Between Urban Design, Public Policy, and Happiness. And basically I wanted to, and I will reflect a little bit about American urbanism and suburbanism along the way, but I basically wanted just to tell you a story about a research project I was involved with a few years ago that I think is of relevance to people-friendly cities in this cost action. I think it was 2007 or 2008, I received a letter and then a phone call from Seoul, Korea, and the mayor, and the National Academy of Sciences wanted to do a research project to understand, to compare cities and to focus on how do we make cities more livable, and how does Seoul particularly stack up with other large international cities. Now, I'll tell you why Mayor Mrs. Mayor O here, was interested in this. The previous mayor of Seoul had made improving the quality of life in the city a major objective. And one of the projects he did while he was mayor was to bring the river back to Seoul, the city of Seoul. The river in Seoul was much like the Liffey. Okay, it's a bit more narrower, but it was similar in that it went down the center of the city. But in the 1960s, they had decided to, in the effort to bring cars into the city more efficiently, they had actually put a motorway on top of the equivalent of the Liffey. Now, don't get any ideas. I know we're pretty close to the halls of power here. But they actually had done this, and so Mayor Lee, the previous mayor, had brought this back, and it became widely popular because it became a very popular public amenity. In the daytime and nighttime, all kinds of activities along the river. And it also increased the value of property and the ability to live in this area. You can see it was quite a change. So we were brought to Seoul, and it was an international team of engineers, social scientists, all types of researchers. And they didn't use these words exactly, but at the time they were saying, how can we make Seoul more livable, more attractive? What key factors matter to people? And one key question the French researchers were pushing was, what conditions of the city affect happiness and well-being? But they were really focused on happiness as part of this movement to think about, to think beyond just GDP and GNP, but also the well-being of people. And questions were raised at these initial meetings: does happiness or well-being in cities have anything to do with urban design or planning or engineering? We know it does, but in what ways? How important is public policy? And there was an interest in how could Seoul learn from these other cities? And how could Seoul become a more attractive place to live and work in? Now, why? In informal discussions, the following would come out. The mayor and his team wanted to improve the quality of life in Seoul so the city could better attract foreign investment in businesses, so the city could attract creative and educated workers and their families, so the city could attract tourists. The mayor of Seoul talked about how it was difficult to attract Westerners to Seoul. They didn't really have a vision in their head as to what to expect. And there was goals about improving the quality of life for current residents, of course. And, of course, the mayor also realized that quality of life mattered politically. The former Mayor Lee had become president of South Korea. And so he felt that this was an important thing to focus on. How do we improve the quality of life in the city? So they did a survey of 10 cities. They interviewed, they did surveys of 1,000 residents in each city, randomly selected and interviewed over 2 years, so that's altogether was 20,000 residents. These are the cities: London, Paris, Berlin, Stockholm, Milan, New York, Toronto, Seoul, Tokyo, and Beijing. I made a push for Dublin, and I was told, Dick, that it was too small. And there was lots of questions then asked of people about what they care about in their city. And one key question we call it a dependent variable. We were asking people how happy they are. And now you might say, you can't measure happiness with the survey question, but you can, and you get at something. And I'll explain why in a minute. But this was the question we asked: how happy are you now? In response, we're given these 5 choices that range from not at all happy to very happy. And what was interesting is you could connect attitudes about the city with their happiness. And I'll show you this. So there's lots of ways we can examine this data. We'll just have to look at some simple correlations here and then get a little more detail. Okay, so here are some of the variables that matter. You can ask people. We ask people a lot of different questions, but only certain ones tend to show an interesting, significant trend. And here are some of the things that matter to people. People tended to report being happier. There was a higher correlation between this question and happiness, which is suggested, and in more sophisticated analysis, demonstrates that there's a relationship between the way people answer this question and their self-reported happiness. So, if you felt that your city allowed easy access to culture and leisure facilities such as theaters, museums, and concert halls, you tended to report being happier. If you said that your city had a lot of parks, now we're comparing cities, comparing a lot of individuals across the city, 20,000 actually. So if you're at an average, if people were likely to report that there's a lot of parks and sports facilities in their cities, they're also more likely to report being happy. If they felt that there was plenty of access to shops and supermarkets and department stores, they're more likely to report being happy. This is interesting. Happiness is related to beauty. This variable comes out very strongly in more sophisticated analyses, that people want to live in a beautiful place, and a place that they're proud of, by the way. So there's a relationship between feeling your city is beautiful and feeling happy. Crime matters. People don't want to live someplace where there's a high crime rates. And this is another important question that comes out. I wrote this question, and it comes out to be a very significant variable predicting happiness. If people feel that their city is a good place to rear and care for children, they're more likely to be happy. They want to feel that where they live is a place that children can live in as well. Here's one that surprised me, that people expect, can you believe this, that they expect public transportation to be good. Is convenient to use public transportation, subways, trains, and buses in my city. That is correlated with happiness. By the way, I did some research into this, and I found this article in the Chicago Tribune. And there was an election going on at the time for mayor of Chicago. And the city, the Chicago Tribune, the newspaper, had done a survey of people asking them what are the important questions that should be addressed in the campaign or by the next mayor. And one of the top responses was providing for better public transportation. They call it mass transit in the U.S. Has nothing to do with the church. So they were talking. People were focused on better public transportation, yet the campaigns were not. This article says, but transportation issues are not raised by the candidates' campaign web pages, and no one has put together a position paper. So in other words, there was a mismatch between what the candidates thought was important and what the people thought was important. They cared about public transportation. They do. I don't know why it's always such a low priority in many, well, especially American cities. So we have more sophisticated models. I won't go into detail, just to say this, okay? These are oftentimes some of the traditional predictors of happiness. This is interesting. If you look at the literature on predicting happiness, you see these variables: income, marital status, employment, social capital, health, and trust in government. These kind of questions are important to people. They rarely ask people questions about the places they live or the public policies that affect their lives, and that's what we did. So what we did was we found that almost all the traditional predictors of happiness, again, were statistically significant or relevant for our model. So what that shows is that our work has face validity. It reflects what previous studies on happiness have demonstrated. People with higher incomes relative to those around them tend to be happier. People who have good health tend to be happier. if you're connected to people in your neighborhood, or you feel you can volunteer in your city, these kind of social variables. If you're more social, you tend to be happier. If you're married, you tend to be happier. And if you think government's doing a good job addressing citizens' concerns, you tend to be happier. Or if you trust government, you tend to be happier. These make some sense. So what we did was we added to these traditional predictors, we looked at place and policy variables. So again, we found, I went through these again, we found variables to be related to happiness, that had to do with the places people live, whether they had access to culture, leisure facilities, good public transportation, they felt their city was beautiful, they were proud of their cities, they had access to parks, shops, and the like. We also found that people cared about some public policies in these models. They want their cities to be good places to care and rear for children. They want their cities to take care of the poor, the handicapped, the disadvantaged. They want to feel it's safe, and they want good schools. So, and we can untangle this in different ways, but you basically find that there's aspects of the place people live and the public policies that affect their life, that affects their happiness above and beyond the usual predictors. Now, of course, all this makes sense, right? Not all urban or suburban places are the same. Some are beautiful and make us proud, fill us with wonder. Others are quite ugly and dysfunctional. Some enable social interactions and others undermine them. Some places are healthy for people and the environment, and some places are unhealthy. And I think, going forward with this network, whether it's completely involved with this cost network or our own research, we need to understand what makes cities livable and people-friendly. We need to understand what people want from their cities and how we can plan them better, engineer them better, and design them better. We need to understand also that public policy has something to do with this. You might design a perfect city in all aspects, but if the schools are terrible, no one wants to live there. Or if there's high crime, it's not a desirable place to live. And I think in doing this, also we have to think about enabling people to age in place, to grow cities where people can grow up in and grow old in. And this was said today in many ways, smart data can help, but I think we also need new processes, new apps, new methods that can enable us to use this data in meaningful ways. We have to ask the right questions and then look at the data. We also need ways to engage residents and experts and involve them in design and redesign. We need to involve people in the making and remaking of public policy. Best practices matter, so do policies, engineering, and planning that take into account local needs and expectations. And just to say a few things here, and I think most people in this room would agree, I think that there's a lot of knowledge in the ways we have traditionally designed cities historically that emphasize time-tested planning designs, integrated transportation, mixed uses. There's a lot of knowledge there. If you look around the world in various countries, you see we used to spend a whole lot of time figuring out how to enable people to attain their daily needs on a daily basis by walking or cycling or public transportation, and mixing, enabling people. Here we go. This is almost the same design around the world. You have Barcelona; it's a mixed-use, pedestrian-oriented area. You can live there, shop there, walk there, cycle there, take public transportation. This is the definition of urban. And you see this kind of characterization around the world. That's Barcelona, Seoul, Galway, Stockholm, India, London. Lots of emphasis on public places, public squares, pitches, parks. There's Poland, New York City. Places where people can gather, social people watch, and good public transportation. There's all kinds of public transportation here. This is the old China. See bicycles, walking, taxis, cars, and other kinds of vehicles. And of course, we need to think a lot about urban residential areas, so that they have a sense of place and a sense of quiet and that are attractive. In the States, and I'd have to say even outside the city centers of Ireland, many times we moved away from this emphasis on building the kind of places people want to live in. And quite often, our new developments were planned by developers and orientated around cars and the automobile. This is a very common site in the U.S. outside of the older towns. It's sort of the new marketplace where you drive to it and you drive through it. I was in Indiana, and I went to, there was a party, so my relatives said go to pick up some wine and beer, and so I went to the what they call the liquor store, and you drive through it. I got out of the car, and they said, what's wrong with you, kind of thing. No, you get back in the car, and they open this garage door, and you drive through, and there's people handing you, bottles of wine and beer into the car, and you pay at the end. The whole idea of the community was not to get out of the car. And we see this as well. By the way, it's not just an American model. We see a lot of this design in some of the newer suburban developments of Ireland as well, and maybe in your own country. Thinking ahead, I think I just want to say a few more things about this. I think when we think about people-friendly cities, we also think about healthy cities. There's a growing research, lots of research on this now. It shows that there's connections between urban design and health. For example, in the United States, if you live in an older city that's more pedestrian-oriented, mixed use, where you can get your daily needs on foot, you're far less likely to be in an automobile accident and be killed. If you're in a car-oriented design place, you're far more likely to be killed in an automobile. If you're living in a car-oriented part of a city, you're far less likely to walk and get the required physical activity you need, which is 30 to 40 minutes a day, and there are all kinds of negative health consequences for that. We have been designing in the States, a lot of the urban policy has actually designed or planned or engineered walking on people's lives. So we end up at places that are very difficult to walk in or through. This is a very typical suburban outlay in the U.S., but also you'd see it here in Ireland, where in a suburban area where it has very long routes that lack connectivity, and it's very difficult for an individual to actually walk through this area because of the distances and oftentimes a lack of footpaths. And just in case you forget, you can be reminded as well. This is from Dublin. This is Dublin suburb. I find it interesting that people now feel very comfortable parking their car. Dick, what's going on here? They're parking their cars right on the footpath. Obviously, there's a problem here. There's an expectation that there's an understanding that this is allowable, and the law is not being enforced. This car was actually parked on the bus stop where you get the bus. We know that design matters for the likelihood of walking and cycling, and that this differs by country. This is encouraged by both design and public policy. And there's some interesting research in the States that if you live, the lower the density of the place you live, the more likely you are to drive. The more time you spend in a car per day, the higher probability of obesity. There's connections between density and connectivity and obesity. If you live someplace where it's denser and it enables connectivity, you're less likely to be overweight. And the problem, of course, is it's not just adults; it's also children who are getting more obese in the United States. These are interesting numbers. the number of children who actually walk or cycle to school in the States has declined significantly from about maybe half of them doing so in 1969 to about 13% now. And this is because we're building communities which are much more spread out, where there's large collector schools and children are expected to walk long distances, and oftentimes there's not the infrastructure provided for them to do these, to have these long walks. Okay. I need a glass of water. Is it possible to get a glass of water? Thank you. I have a bit of a cold. I'm almost finished here. I just want to say also, I think people-friendly cities should be social. I've done some research on this, examining the relationship between urban design and social capital, or the extent to which people are engaged in their communities. Is there no water? Yeah. Okay, thanks. Sorry, just... I've done some research looking at social capital, basically to what extent people are engaged or connect or involved with others and within their communities. And for example, I did some research in Galway a few years ago, where we did surveys of people living in the city center or near city center neighborhoods, where you could walk to get your daily needs, which were much more pedestrian oriented, and compare them with people living in much more American style suburbs, where you drive to get basically most of your daily needs. By the way, this design is also associated with big box retailers. It's a completely different type of retail associated with certain urban designs. This is one of the suburbs. I have to say, the homes are lovely and it has lovely shrubbery, but you can see there's not even a footpath, not even bothered. They didn't even bother even to put a footpath in this neighborhood, and there's many like that. The assumption is that you're supposed to drive, and I found this interesting that I discovered children playing in the median strip. And very, I just had to say, in neighborhoods which you'd expect, I think which you could expect a lot more. These are fairly costly neighborhoods, yet there wasn't a whole lot of thought about where children will play and how they'd get to them. And you see this kind of design. So we compared people living in more mixed-use, pedestrian-oriented neighborhoods with more of the car-oriented neighborhoods. They even have these walls which are difficult to get around. And we found that if you lived in a more walkable area, we asked people, which of the following could you walk to? And each person can get a score from 1 to 10. So people who lived in a more walkable neighborhood would report being able to walk to a lot of destinations. We found interesting relationships. If you lived in a more pedestrian-oriented neighborhood where you could walk to get your daily needs, you were more likely to know your neighbors, because you're more likely to be out, bump into them, talk to them, know their faces. The design of the neighborhood also affected the likelihood that you would feel that you were part of or connected to your community. The design itself affected the likelihood of walking, which is good for health. And there are some interesting connections here as well, that design also affected your connection to politicians, or also the likelihood that you think people are fair and trustworthy. Okay. I'm going to close with this following thought, that somewhere along the line, when we talk about people-friendly cities, we should think about beauty, because it's a big thing I'm into now, is because it came out in that survey that people want the places they live in to be beautiful. And we could debate what beauty is, and especially in urban places, and how we might measure it, and how we might attain it. But I would say that if it's a conversation for another day, but we also, if we're going to argue about what beauty is, well, I think we can get over the fact that we do know what ugliness is, and we do build a lot of ugly places that people are not satisfied with. And we build these in different countries around the world and in cities. I still haven't figured out what this garden is in front of this particular dwelling. So the way we plan and design our communities has importance for whether they're people-friendly or not. And I like to think that there's important connections between attractive, walkable neighborhoods, good public transportation links, the likelihood of walking, the extent to which you use your car, and carbon emissions. And that design also affects your health, your social connections, your well-being. So we have to think about all of these factors when we think about what is people-friendly. And we didn't even get to the data part yet. So I'll end with that. Thank you.